We're going to get things started today. Once again, thanks for joining. Really excited to have our second webinar of the year. The most exciting thing about today's webinar is that I finally have shelves behind me in my office. So there's some things going on. I'm a relatively large Donald Duck fan, so there it is. Happy to not be in a white dungeon anymore. So excited about that. First webinar of 2023. Really excited about the webinar this week. I know last webinar just before the holidays, we talked a lot about training loops and how to optimize your training investment. But today is really something that has come off of some really fantastic conversations that I was engaged in when I visited CES the first week of January. CES was oddly early this year as well, right after New Year's, but it was exciting to go and have some really positive conversations with a lot of people in the retail training space and the retail industry. Obviously down there, a little bit consumer electronics focused, but just to give everybody a high level. And before we do that, feedback is great. We'll send out some surveys afterwards to get your feedback. If you like the video portion in comparison to me having a little bit of a presentation from last time, feel free to provide feedback what format you like differently. Hoping to be a little bit more interactive with you guys today. So I'll start. We're going to basically cover three things today. The first is understanding these perceived retail changes. So obviously the topic of the webinar is the retail labor market and kind of the way things have changed in some different areas. So we're going to talk about the perception around that and understanding those changes. The second thing we're going to cover is how to take advantage of the new environment. So as an organization that sells product through retail, as a partner organization that works with companies selling through retail or who provides labor to retail, how can you take advantage of the environment? And then the last thing we're gonna talk about today is doing the best with your budget. So whether your budget is extra large and you got lots to talk about and lots to do and lots you can throw out, or if you're dealing with a small budget or a shrinking budget because of economic times or things like that, how can you take your budget and deploy it as strategically as possible to make sure that it works out well for you? On that note, just progressing forward, what I want to do before we hop in is sometimes when things change in retail or in just your general environment, you forget why you do them in general. So we're going to start with number one, why we actually train people in retail. So why are we out there? Why are we training people in person? Why do we train people online? So what it was like before, what it was like after. So if you want to throw in the chat why you think or why you currently train people in retail, feel free to put some comments in there and that we can talk about a little bit. I'll give you a quick second as we do that. But what we want to really start to do is understand when things change, get back to our roots and understand the importance of training in retail. So reasons why we train in retail, obviously, to gain mind share of those who are actually selling your products. As a brand who sells through retail and you aren't direct to consumer, you want to actually educate those people and make sure that they can sell your product better. Brian, thank you very much. To build brand affinity and advocacy in store, to make sure those people who are interacting with your brand are reflecting the connection they have with you to the customers who come in store to give them the best customer experience. And that'd be the next one I would add in, customer experience. I think today more than ever, as we'll talk about a little bit, the customers who are coming into store are doing that because they can't get what a sales associate can provide them in person online. And Justin, thank you very much for your comments. Driving sell-through. So we train people to help drive sell-through and kind of grow that experience. And just because the labor market has changed doesn't mean that we stop going back to our roots and stop focusing on brand affinity, customer experience, customer advocacy. And that was one thing I really heard when I was down at CES. And a lot of our conversations stretched around that. Why should we train people when they're stretched across multiple departments, or they're dealing with so many brands, or they're scheduled so thinly, and we're not interacting with them as frequently as we can? And we'll dive into that a little bit more. So today we're going to cover 4 types of retail that I want to talk about. So with today, there really are 4 key areas of retail we're going to cover in terms of the labor model. So the first is big box. We're talking, your Dick's Sporting Goods, your Best Buys, your Cabela's, your Bass Pro, and other things like that. We're going to talk about specialty and regional retailers, maybe something like Micro Center or PC Richards, or some different specialty areas, on the West Coast, that are out there. We're also going to talk about the luxury space and how retail is in the luxury space. And then we're also going to discuss the carrier, the wireless, the mobile market, and how they are each a little bit different. So first area we'll talk is big box. One of the biggest changes that was talked about in a lot of conversations really with big box was, how are we supposed to, or why should we invest in training? Why should we work and go into store and talk to these sales associates in big box when they are starting at, maybe they work in digital imaging and they're working in cameras and they're selling camera products, and then tomorrow they could be scheduled in home theater. Why should we train them when we don't know where they're actually going to be? Why is that a good investment for us? Because right now there's a lot of workforce optimization. There's a lot of trying to make people more flexible in their schedules and how they can help customers. In some cases, 3PL, third-party labor companies are transacting in store and actually are able to, help provide guidance and then check people out when they're not necessarily sales associates of that brand. And one of the things that we really talked about that is and we'll dive into it a little bit deeper, but all the more reason to actually have those conversations. You just may have to have them a little bit differently. When you talk about specialty and regional retailers, there's a lot of desire from those sales associates. Actually, at a conference earlier this week, talking to some of those sales associates, there's a desire from specialty retail to actually become educated. And how has this new labor model, less people, more hours, maybe needing to understand different areas, how is that actually creating a question and an advantage for you? Because they want to know more. In the luxury market, customer experience is everything. And that hasn't changed. And luxury products are being purchased online more than they ever have, but the ability to come in, be shown what's out there and shown the whole wide breadth of what is out there is a huge deal in the luxury space. So training, advocacy, affinity, obviously very, very important for there. And then last space, the fastest moving of them all is the mobile carrier wireless space. A lot going on there, prepaid, whether they're large carriers in other ways. But the turnover in that space is so high. So a lot of people ask questions about why should we train people when they're not going to be there 8 weeks later or 6 weeks later or 12 weeks later. And that's where it comes is you have to try to cast a wide net, have to try to build a connection outside of who you actually are, to make sure that you can be as efficient as possible with your training, but also allow those people who are there for a job in the mobile space and maybe aren't there like they are at some big box retailers for their career, to make sure it's as effective and as efficient as possible. With that note, I just want to comment, are there any other challenges you see with what's changed in the past few months? Like I said, one of the biggest things that we heard at CES was what the role sales associates actually have in the sale now in comparison to before. So why don't you, if there's a moment, we can add comments to the chat about why any other problems or concerns or kind of roadblocks you see in the retail space today, outside of some things that we highlighted, whether it's turnover, whether it's being able to be scheduled across multiple areas, multiple brands, et cetera. Are there any other challenges you guys see in that area? Perfect. Nothing else to add. I will take a moment to move on to the next step. So the next thing we're going to cover, how to take advantage of it. How can we take advantage? So, oh, Brian, thanks for that. Commission structures have changed and it drives different behaviors. That's fantastic. I'd love to dive into that more as we kind of talk through. Brian, if you don't mind coming context, if you want to take yourself off mute, feel free, or you can just comment in the chat. But are you speaking specifically to kind of specialty retailers? Like in In what area specifically are you commenting on it?
Been waiting my whole life to talk in Daniel's webinar. So thanks for having me on the show. It's mostly the carrier space, the wireless space you talked about at the end, but I would venture to say it's probably affecting all of those channels, maybe differently. Where commission was the main driver of an employee's base pay, I'm going to guess base pay in general has changed across all of those channels. And in doing so, like, is there the same level of caring? You know, rewind 10 years ago, does an employee care the same way that they care today? And the pay is a reflection of that. How do you keep them motivated?
Awesome. Thanks for providing context. Glad to have you, Brian. Thanks. As Justin said in the chat, longtime listener, first time caller. So thanks for coming and dropping that in there. And I think it segues well into kind of where I was going to go about taking advantage right now. And the first point I wanted to talk about when it came to taking advantage was offering more than knowledge to help build brand affinity. So as Brian just mentioned, commission structures have changed, their motivations have changed, the behaviors that are causing sell-through or sales in store have changed. How do we take advantage of that? And when I talk about offering more than knowledge, a lot of the companies who are selling through retail nowadays have initiatives they're focused on. They have core values, whether it's opportunity, creating opportunity for others, whether it's creating excellence through their brand, whether if you think someone like Best Buy who's focused on delivering innovation and those items through technology, understanding the brand and the value that these companies selling to retail have, and building a connection with the sales associate so that when they're in store, there is more to the sale. Because I heard this, I had a long conversation with an old partner of ours in Las Vegas at CES, and they summed it up the perfect way. And I think one day I'll steal this and make it my own, but for now, I'll give credit where credit's due. I had a great conversation. They said the sales associate's job in the store is not necessarily to sell a product, it is to break a tie. And in the world we live in today, customers are coming into store with more education, more knowledge, whether it's TikTok influencers or Instagram influencers or whatever they hear that's out there. They know more than they ever have before. And in a lot of times, a lot of products are very, very comparable and comparable in terms of their features. One of the comments I heard last week was pretty much every router has the same specs, like grand scheme. There are some things they're better at or worse at, but they have the same specs. Sometimes the chips are manufactured in the same facility and they go to different products. How is a sales associate breaking the tie in store? And before, it may have been, a corporate commission structure. It may have been a spiff or some sort of advantage that a brand would give. And maybe those things have changed. And with that, you have to build some other connection to help them break the tie. And that moves me into point two, which is build the connection. So how do you build the connection with the RSA? So it's why we're here today. Whether it's in person, whether it's online, having the ability to build a connection through retail training, through in-person training. And love this comment, Dana. Employees are seeking a sense of purpose, knowledge, expertise, recognition is so important to that. And I think that's where the connection and the affinity comes from, is how can you as a brand or a retailer really push individuals down the path of recognition for selling a product, building whether it's online, whether it's in person, an attaboy or a pat on the back or something to get people excited that maybe isn't always financial, because everybody is motivated a little bit differently in store. And for these people, they have to figure out what brands they want to recommend to the customers. And then the last way that you can really take advantage when it comes to this new model is being simple and consistent. So when you're delivering information in store is people, like we said, they're being scheduled across multiple departments. They are maybe not working in a field where they felt very comfortable. So I'll give you an example. Sales associate works specialty. They work in home theater. They work in home electronics. Maybe they work in computing, whatever it is. And before, in their downtime at work, on the sales floor, customers weren't coming in. They had the ability to maybe go read the back of a box, maybe log on to their learning management system and take a training from that vendor or that manufacturer and gain a little bit more, because if I learned more about the products in home theater or home electronics, I then was able to sell better, which maybe affected my commission structure. As we mentioned earlier, maybe it affected my overall bonus because, sell through at our department was a certain way. So my casual discovery of information and knowledge was there for me to just kind of go down that path because it made me a better employee. Now the priorities have shifted to, making sure they get more shifts and making sure they get scheduled across different departments and be available in that capacity so they can just work more hours, make more money that way, be more of a malleable, flexible, adaptable employee for the organization, because a lot of retail is laying people off currently. So maybe knowledge about the products isn't where they want to go, but just flexibility and knowledge about the space and the industry is where they want to go. So that casual discovery of vendor information, product information to help sell through isn't there. But being able to provide simple and consistent information so that you're top of mind when they come there. So I'll use another example. We'll stay in the home electronics space. You manufacture a TV. There's lots of televisions and lots of ways to put information out there for people to watch. Can we provide documents, infographics, short 30-second videos or clips to really work with, when you're in store retail training somebody? That way the information is there top of mind. They see it, they think about your brand, and they kind of take it back to them. And making sure that consistency doesn't fall off a lip. I talked last webinar about training loops. The goal is, people may not remember the video they took or the document they read or those sorts of things after 7 days, or maybe even after 30 seconds, who knows? But can you be consistent in how you show up? That way they understand your brand, understand the value you provide, understand the core values of your organization, and continue the affinity and connection with you in order to take that down the path to a place where, once again, they can break the tie with your brand or your message or your product, whatever that may be. All right, before I transition into doing the best with your budget, I wanted to kind of dive back in to go back into before or after with retail training, what it was like before, what it was like after, because it will allow us to kind of, spring forward into optimizing your budget. So in a perfect world, the retail training pie has 6 components of it. It has a community type feel. It has the ability to build a community around, either it could be an in-person community, it could be a digital community online. As number one, you have the ability to run training events. They could be in person, they could be digitally, but the ability to have events. So you have a community, you have events, then you have your product knowledge content, information that could be found on YouTube, could be found on your website, your LMS, in documents, videos that goes out there, or a quick kind of demonstration in store. There is obviously the ability to support all of those things. So if I'm a sales associate and I have a question, I need someone to go to. So how do we support those initiatives? And then you have just personal growth and development of the sales associate. And then the last component, which I kind of mentioned a little bit, and it's kind of riddled through all of it, is the in-person training aspect. So those are your 6 real components of retail training. And before, it was really easy is maybe the wrong word, but there was a lot of required training in retail where you would have ILTs, virtual instructor-led trainings, that brought the information out. And now that's kind of gone away. The after of retail training is, like you said, can I get scheduled for my shift? And there's a little bit less of that required component coming from the retailer. So taking your budget, regardless of the size, and understanding that more than ever, attention spans, and I'm going to use the word attention span, but I was reading a really interesting study a couple of weeks ago that attention spans of humans hasn't actually decreased over the past 100 years. There's just been more accessible information to distract them, right? We're all sitting here watching this webinar, trying to get information, and our phone is buzzing, our watch is buzzing. There's something popping up on Instagram. The person walks by next to you. When TV and video or radio were there, that was really what we were doing. We were reading the newspaper, and that's what we were doing. And that there's just been more distractions. And with that is you have to, number one, be convenient and consistent and simple, like we mentioned, but also meet the individuals that you are training where they want to be trained. So, for example, if you're working in I'll use the carrier space as an example, fast moving, lots of things changing, quick turnover, having someone sit down for a 20, 30, 40, 60-minute onboarding session about health and safety or how to sell a certain product isn't what they're used to in terms of content. They want quick, bite-sized pieces of information as they need it. They go look for information as they need it. So being able to take your program for the year and how can I show up in that way? How can I have bite-sized pieces of information in order to be more effective in delivering that sort of training the way they want to see it? Not only that, what kind of content do people engage with right away, and how do you meet that need? I'm a really odd example of this. I know video content is so popular, but if I'm looking at a news article, I see a headline I like, and I click into it, I actually prefer to read. And if it's video only for me, that bothers me. And I don't really read that much. I'm not a big book guy, but in those cases of small bite-sized pieces of information, I could be in a public setting where I can't hear or different things. I want to make sure that I can actually access information quickly in the way that I prefer. And that's one of the ways, maximizing budget and looking to move forward is something we want to do. So on that note, forgive me because I'm going to draw a picture here. So it's a good one. Of the things that we talk about maximizing our budget in retail training has been pretty much my kind of something we've been talking about a ton, but I'll bring this right up to the screen. So basically, if you think about that forward-looking arrow, that is us starting here in January, and that's us progressing 12 months down the line to the end of the year. We're looking at 2023 as a year, and we're talking about retail. So basically in retail, now it's extending, a lot of things are changing, but you basically have your announcements that come at the start of the year with your springtime, maybe early summer reset. You kind of hit that moms, dads, and grads time of year, the Mother's Day, Father's Day, graduation time of year, progressing to summer. So that's your one area of product launch. And with people dedicated to certain areas, what we used to have was the ability to provide product knowledge, leading up to that time, leave it there, and people would casually discover it throughout the year, and they would casually learn about the product that's on the shelves. And then they get to the fall time of year in retail, where also new products come out and are put there. And then you kind of got that casual knowledge as you needed things as they rolled into the holiday season. And obviously retail is big during the holiday season. What we're looking at doing is taking that, we'll use some round numbers. And we say that, we're going to spend $20,000 on training in the spring and $20,000 on retail training in the fall to stay nice and easy. You can then take that and look at it and say, okay, how can I show up consistently? How can I consistently build a relationship to drive affinity and advocacy with these individuals over time, knowing that they're not just going to self-discover who we are and who we are as a brand. And that's where it comes into where you want to actually optimize what you put out. So you may take that $20,000 here and $20,000 there, $40,000, and spread it out throughout the year and start to post trainings in an area, maybe a couple times a month, or maybe just once a month to start with, depending on what it is, and spread that out throughout the year. That way you're showing up and interacting with them consistently, and you can build a relationship. So in this case, I like to draw I'll call them my training loop circles in this capacity, but basically we train somebody in this time, and then we allow them to be motivated to sell our product, and then we do it again. And we allow them to just be loops forward And every time we interact with somebody, it drives them further down the path of building a relationship with us. And we hope that in the long term, we can actually build that affinity and build that advocate because we showed up where we want them to show up. We provide them information consistently to help build a positive relationship between them and our brand. And we've taken the fact that they're very active in store, they're pulled in a lot of directions, and that we may not want to train them because why invest in someone who's a flight risk, or why invest in someone who's going to leave and do those sorts of things. And instead, we've helped empower them. We've helped given them more of a sense of purpose. To Dana's point earlier, we've given them more knowledge, more expertise, and allowed them to be recognized within their role. So they can actually go back to the reasons and the actions and the outcomes that we wanted to hit. The outcomes being sell-through, better brand affinity, more sales consistently across the board throughout the year, and not only during those product launch periods, because we're able to break the tie consistently throughout the 12 months of the year. On that note, I'm going to pause there for a second. That's really the end of today's webinar from an information perspective from my end. Are there any questions, comments you guys want to throw in the chat? Feel free to hop off a mute if you want and ask a question or provide feedback. We're a small, intimate group today, so don't mind just letting you guys hop off mute and hop in.
I'll add just one quick point that made me think as you're serving up this content. What we don't know is what happens after a rep leaves, and how impactful is that advocacy because you did serve it up, and maybe they change retailers, so it's still relevant, but maybe they don't, and they just become a consumer. That's still powerful from a brand perspective. Just to add into the end of what you were talking, there's kind of interesting.
Appreciate that addition. And I think that the concept of education or training in retail or education and training overall, I think is just really, there's a lot of blurred lines and blended lines between consumer retail marketing, consumer product marketing, and sales associate marketing. And like you said, those sales associates most likely or potentially could be your consumers as well. So there's definitely quite the advantage there. Thanks so much, Brian. I'll pause for dramatic effect to see if anybody else wants to hop in or comment. And if not, our goal continues to be to keep these quick 30 minutes, under 30 minutes in terms of the webinar. But I wanted to once again thank everybody for coming, joining the webinar. If you see it up on LinkedIn, later on this week and you've enjoyed it, feel free to share it and comment. Brian, you might be famous after this week's webinar. Who knows? We get invited to a bunch of new podcasts about retail training. You can be the expert. So, but if there's anything else that you guys wanted to add, feel free to drop it in the chat. If not, would appreciate the share when it comes out on LinkedIn. I really appreciate everybody joining today once again. And we're excited to continue the Dare to Be Different webinar series this year.